Sarah knew she shouldn't have kept it. It was just a small piece of wood, no bigger than her thumb, carved into the shape of a bluebird. But as she tucked it deep into the pocket of her apron, her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird itself. She had found it resting on the schoolhouse windowsill this morning, the wood still smelling of fresh pine and linseed oil. There was only one man in the district who carved like that. A man who wasn't supposed to be carving for her. A man who was supposed to be courting the widow Miller, not leaving silent gifts for the spinster school. If the bishop found it, the questions would start. But as the buggy wheels crunched on the gravel outside, Sarah didn't throw it away. She squeezed it tight, terrified of the hope rising in her chest. The morning mist still clung to the low valleys of Holmes County, wrapping the cornfields in a blanket of silver and white. It was a Tuesday in late October, the kind of morning that promised a warm afternoon but started with a bite in the air that demanded a heavy shawl. Inside the one-room schoolhouse, at the edge of the Yoder farm, Sarah Yoder was already awake, her hands moving rhythmically as she clapped the chalk erasers together by the open window. At 28 years old, Sarah was considered an old maid by the standards of her community. Most of the women her age were already mothers to 4 or 5 children, their days filled with the endless cycle of washing, cooking, and mending. Sarah's life was different. Her days were filled with the scratching of slate pencils, the recitation of high German verses, and the laughter of children who went home to other mothers at the end of the day. She told herself she was content. She told her mangem she was content. But sometimes, in the quiet moments before the scholars arrived, when the silence of the empty room pressed against her ears, she felt a hollow ache in the center of her chest that prayer alone could not fill. She placed the erasers back on the ledge and picked up her broom. The floorboards were worn smooth by generations of boots, and she knew every creak and groan of the timber. As she swept near the heavy oak door, a shadow fell across the threshold, blocking the pale morning sunlight. Sarah gasped, clutching the broom handle to her chest. Standing in the doorway was a man she had not seen in 3 years. He was taller than she remembered, his shoulders broader, filling the frame of the door. He wore the traditional broadfall trousers and a dark vest, his straw hat held respectfully in his large, rough hands. His beard was trimmed neatly along the jawline, signaling his status as a married man or, in his case, a widow. "Peace be with you, Sarah," he said, his voice deep and gravelly, like stones tumbling in a riverbed. "And with you, Jonas," Sarah whispered, her grip on the broom tightening until her knuckles turned white. Jonas Beiler. He had left the district 3 years ago, moving to a settlement in Indiana after his young wife, Leah, had passed away during childbirth. The tragedy had shaken the community, and Jonas had fled the memories that haunted every corner of his farm. "I did not know you were back," Sarah managed to say, smoothing her apron, suddenly conscious of the chalk dust on her sleeve. "I returned on Sunday," Jonas said, stepping fully into the room but keeping a respectful distance. "The bishop asked me to look at the schoolhouse roof. He says there is a leak near the chimney that threatens the winter woodpile. I came to measure it before the scholars arrive." Sarah nodded, her heart beating a strange, erratic rhythm. "It drips when the rain comes from the east," she said, pointing toward the corner near the potbelly stove. "I have to move the reading bench every time." Jonas looked where she pointed, his eyes lingering on the stain on the ceiling. Then his gaze drifted back to her. His eyes were the color of the autumn sky, a piercing, clear blue that seemed to see right through her defenses. "You have kept the school well, Sarah. It smells ... peaceful here." "It is my work," she answered simply. "Work is a gift." "Yeah," he agreed softly. "Work is a gift, but sometimes it is also a hiding place." The comments hung in the air between them, heavy and unspoken. Before Sarah could ask what he meant, the sound of buggy wheels and children shouting echoed from the road. The scholars were arriving. Jonas put his hat back on, tipping the brim. "I will be up on the roof today. I will try not to disturb your lessons." He turned and walked out, his boots crunching on the gravel. Sarah stood frozen for a moment, watching him go. She remembered the boy he used to be, the one who sat 3 rows back in this very room, who used to carve little figures out of chalk to make her laugh. She shook her head, forcing the memory away. He was a widower now, with a farm to run and a sorrow to carry. And she was the school teacher. There was no bridge between their worlds anymore. Over the next 2 weeks, the rhythmic sound of a hammer overhead became the soundtrack to Sarah's days. Jonas was thorough. He didn't just patch the leak. He replaced the rotting shingles, reinforced the chimney, and even fixed the hinge on the woodshed door that had been screeching for years. The propriety of the Ordnung was strict. An unmarried woman and a man not related to her were not to be alone together. But because the schoolhouse was a public place, and the children were always present or playing in the yard, it was permitted. Yet there was an intimacy in their proximity that felt dangerous. During recess, while the boys played cornerball and the girls braided clover chains, Jonas would come down the ladder to drink from the pump. Sarah would often be there, washing the slate rags. "The wind is cold today," Sarah had said one afternoon, handing him a tin cup of water. Her fingers brushed his for a fraction of a second, sending a jolt of warmth up her arm. "Winter is coming early," Jonas replied, drinking deeply. He wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. "Sarah, do you remember the winter of the big snow, when we were children?" Sarah smiled, a genuine, soft smile that lit up her plain face. "I remember you tied a rope to your father's sleigh and pulled us all the way to the frozen pond. You were stronger than the horses, we thought." Jonas laughed, a rusty sound, as if he hadn't used it in a long time. "I was foolish. I spent 3 days in bed with a fever after that." He looked at her, his expression turning serious. "You brought me soup. Your munga made it, but you walked it over in the snow." "That is what neighbors do," Sarah said, looking down at her black shoes. "It was more than duty," Jonas said quietly. "I never forgot it." The recess bell, a heavy brass handbell Sarah kept on her desk, sat silent, but the time was passing. They stood by the pump, the water dripping slowly into the trough. It was a conversation about snow and soup, but it felt like a conversation about loneliness and memory. The next morning, Sarah found the bluebird. It was sitting on the windowsill near her desk. It was carved from a piece of light maple, the grain of the wood perfectly following the curve of the bird's wing. It was smooth sanded to perfection, and oiled until it glowed. There was no note. There didn't need to be. Sarah knew Jonas's hands. She looked out the window. Jonas was atop the roof, his back to her, hammering a shingle. She slipped the bird into her pocket. It was a secret, a small, wooden secret that weighed heavy with implication. Gifts between men and women were for courting. A widower did not give gifts to a spinster unless his intentions were serious. But Jonas had not spoken to her father. He had not asked permission to drive her home in his buggy. This was something else, something silent and fragile. That evening, as Sarah walked home down the dusty lane, a black buggy slowed beside her. It was not Jonas. It was Levi Stoltzfus, the bishop's son, a stern man who ran the local feed store. "Walking alone, Sarah?" Levi asked, his voice lacking the warmth Jonas possessed. "It is a fine evening for walking, Levi," she replied politely. "I saw Jonas Beiler at the schoolhouse again," Levi observed, flicking the reins lightly. "That roof must be very broken to take so long." "He is doing good work," Sarah said defensively. "Yeah, well," Levi narrowed his eyes. "People talk. A man alone, a woman alone. We must be careful of the appearance of evil, Sarah. The Ordnung protects us from our own foolishness." He clicked his tongue to the horse and drove on, leaving a cloud of dust and dread in his wake. The crisis came on a Sunday. 2 weeks later, the community had gathered for Jimmy church service at the Miller farm. The sensory details of the service were etched into Sarah's mind. The smell of the damp earth in the cellar where the men met. The scent of peppermint candies passed to restless children. The drone of the slow, mournful hymns that had been sung for centuries. After the 3-hour service, during the light lunch of bread, cheese, and pickles, Sarah was helping serve coffee. She moved through the rows of benches, pouring steaming dark liquid into ceramic mugs. She saw Jonas across the room, sitting with the men. He looked tired. He caught her eye, just for a moment, and gave a barely perceptible nod. Sarah felt a flush rise to her cheeks and quickly looked away, pouring coffee for Mrs. Miller, the bishop's wife. "Careful, Sarah," Mrs. Miller said sharply as a drop of coffee splashed onto the saucer. "Your mind seems to be wandering today." "I am sorry," Sarah murmured, wiping the saucer with the cloth. "It is interesting," Mrs. Miller said, her voice dropping to a whisper that was meant to be overheard by the women nearby. "I was cleaning out the schoolhouse supply closet yesterday, helping get ready for the winter session. I found a pile of wood shavings under the teacher's desk." "Maple shavings, Sarah," Feroce. "The shavings must have fallen from Jonas's clothes when he came inside to check the chimney flue from the inside. And," Mrs. Miller continued, her eyes sharp as flint, "I saw you walking near the creek with Jonas Beiler on Thursday after school was out. You were not walking toward home, Sarah." It was true. Jonas had asked her to look at a tree that had fallen near the water, asking if it could be used for firewood for the school. It was innocent, strictly speaking, about school business, but to the onlookers, it was a stroll. "We were discussing the firewood," Sarah said, her voice trembling. "Firewood," Mrs. Miller sniffed. "Jonas is a widower. He needs a mother for his future children, not a schoolteacher who reads too many books. My niece, Martha, she is a widow. A good cook. That is who the bishop thinks Jonas should visit." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. Martha, of course, it made sense. Martha was sturdy, practical, and had raised 3 children before her husband died. She was the logical choice. The Amish choice. That evening, Sarah's father, Amos, sat at the head of the long wooden table. The kerosene lamp cast long, dancing shadows on the walls. "Sarah," Amos said, his voice heavy with the weight of his responsibility as head of the household, "Bishop Stoltzfus spoke to me today." Sarah stared at her plate, her appetite gone. "Yes, dead. He says there is talk about you and Jonas." Amos sighed, rubbing his tired face. "He says Jonas is distracted, that he is lingering at the schoolhouse. Jonas is a good man, but he is confused by his grief. He needs a wife who can run a farm, not a companion for conversation." "We have done nothing wrong," Sarah whispered. "It is not about wrong or right, Sarah," her mother interjected gently, placing a hand on Sarah's arm. "It is about order. It is about what is best for the community. Jonas has been advised to stop working on the school. Levi will finish the roof." "And Jonas?" Sarah asked, her voice barely audible. "Jonas has agreed to start visiting Martha Yoder next Sunday," Amos said. "It is for the best, Sarah. You have your calling with the children. Do not covet a life that is not yours to have." Sarah excused herself and went to her room. She sat on the edge of a bed, pulling the wooden bluebird from her pocket. She traced the smooth wings with her thumb. It was over before it had even begun. The weeks that followed were a blur of gray skies and freezing rain. Levi Stoltzfus finished the roof, He was loud and clumsy, and he left mud on the floor, but he was safe. He was not a temptation. Sarah saw Jonas only at church. He looked thinner. He sat with the men. And during the social hour, she saw him standing near Martha. Martha was laughing, handing him a plate of cookies. Jonas was polite. He nodded, but his eyes were empty. He didn't look for Sarah anymore. The pain was a physical weight in Sarah's stomach. It wasn't just jealousy. It was a profound sense of loss. She missed his mind. She missed the way he looked at the world, seeing the beauty in the grain of wood or the silence of the snow. In a community that valued conformity, Jonas had seen Hertha unique, quiet woman beneath the bonnet, and he had cherished that uniqueness. One afternoon in December, a heavy blizzard struck. The snow came down thick and fast, turning the world into a swirling white void. School was dismissed early, and the parents came in their buggies to collect the children. By 4 p.m., the school was empty. Sarah banked the fire in the stove and prepared to lock up. The snow was already a foot deep and drifting high against the door. She wrapped her heavy woolen shawl around her head and shoulders and stepped out into the storm. The walk home was usually 20 minutes. Today, it was a battle. The wind howled, stinging her face with ice. She kept her head down, trudging through the drifts. She was halfway home when she heard a sound over the wind. A whinny, a horse in distress. She squinted into the whiteout. Off to the side of the road, a buggy was tilted at a dangerous angle in the ditch. The horse was thrashing, tangled in the harness. Sarah rushed forward, the snow reaching her knees. "Whoa! Easy, say, souded." She reached the buggy. It was Jonas's black, open-topped courting buggy. But Jonas wasn't in the seat. "Jonas!" she screamed, her voice torn away by the wind. She found him on the ground, on the other side of the buggy. He had been thrown when the wheel hit the ditch. He was conscious, but he was clutching his leg, his face pale as the snow around him. "Sarah," he groaned, his teeth chattering. "I am here," she said, dropping to her knees beside him. "You are hurt. My leg. I think it is broken." Jonas gasped. "I was ... I was coming to the school to make sure you had wood." He hadn't been going to Martha's. He had been coming to check on her. "We have to get you warm," Sarah said, panic rising in her throat. The temperature was dropping rapidly. If they stayed here, they would freeze. She looked at the horse. It had calmed down, but the buggy axle was snapped. They couldn't ride. "Lean on me," Sarah commanded, a strength rising in her that she didn't know she possessed. "The Miller barn is closer than my house. We have to walk." "I cannot," Jonas whispered. "You must," Sarah said fiercely. She grabbed his arm and pulled. He cried out in pain but managed to stand on one leg. She wedged her shoulder under his arm, taking his weight. They walked. It was a slow, agonizing march through the valley of shadows. Every step was a battle against the wind. Jonas grew heavier with every yard. Sarah prayed. She prayed the Lord's Prayer, over and over, matching the rhythm of the words to their steps. "Unser, Vater, our Father." "Sarah," Jonas mumbled, his voice slurring. I tried to do what they wanted, but I cannot see Martha when I close my eyes. I only see you." "Hush!" Sarah cried, tears freezing on her cheeks. "Save your strength." "I carved the bird for you," he said, delirious now. "Because you are like the bird. You sing a song. ... Only I can hear." They reached the Miller barn just as the last of the daylight faded. Sarah shoved the heavy sliding door open and collapsed inside with him into the sweet-smelling hay. Sarah didn't rest. She covered Jonas with horse blankets. She found a lantern and lit it. She rubbed his hands, which were blue with cold. Mr. Miller found them an hour later when he came to do the evening milking. The next few days were a flurry of doctor visits and hushed conversations. Jonas's leg was set. He had hypothermia, but he would live. The community buzzed with the news. Sarah Yoder had saved Jonas Beiler's life. She had dragged him through a blizzard. 3 days later, the bishop came to the Yoder house. Jonas was there, sitting in a chair with his leg propped up, pale but determined. He had insisted on being brought over. The bishop, Sarah's father, and Jonas sat in the parlor. Sarah was asked to join them. "This is a difficult situation," Bishop Stoltzfus said, stroking his long gray beard. "You were alone together in the barn. It is not proper." "We were dying," Jonas said, his voice firm. "There is no impropriety in survival." "Sarah," the bishop turned to her, "you acted with courage. But now the talk will be louder than ever." Jonas looked at the bishop, then at Sarah's father. Then he turned his eyes to Sarah. "Let him talk," Jonas said. "I am done living for the talk. I am done living for a memory of a life that is gone." He reached into his pocket. He pulled out a small, rough object. It was another carving. This one was unfinished, just the shape of 2 birds sitting side by side on a branch. "I cannot court Martha," Jonas said to the bishop. "It would be a lie, and we are people of the truth." He looked at Sarah. "Sarah, I am a man with a broken leg and a farm that needs work. I am not the young man who pulled the sleigh. I have scars, but I love you. I have loved you since I walked into that schoolhouse and saw you erasing the board." The room went silent. Such a declaration was rare in their stoic culture. Emotions were usually kept hidden. Sarah looked at her father. Amish looked at his daughter. He saw the way she looked at Jonas, not with the flighty infatuation of a teenager, but with the steady, enduring gaze of a woman who has found her home. Amish sighed. Then a small smile touched his lips. He looked at the bishop. "The Bible says, 'It is not good for man to be alone.' And it seems the Lord has steered their buggy into the same ditch." The bishop paused. He looked at the 2 of them. The Ordnung was strong, but the community was built on love and family. To deny this bond, forged in a storm, would be to deny something plainly ordained by God. "If you ought to court," the bishop grumbled, though his eyes were not unkind, "you will do it properly." In the front room, with the door open. "Yeah," Jonas said, a smile breaking through his beard. "The door will be open." The camera of the mind pans forward. 2 years later, it is harvest time. The corn is high and gold. The air smells of dust and dry leaves. On the porch of the farmhouse that once belonged only to Jonas, Sarah sits in a rocking chair. She is wearing a dark blue dress and a white apron. In her lap, she is quilting. The pattern is the log cabin, a symbol of the home. The door opens, and Jonas steps out. He walks with a slight limp, a reminder of the winter storm. He holds a mug of coffee. He sits on the step near her feet. He doesn't say anything. He just watches the sun dip below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of purple and orange. Sarah reaches into her sewing basket and pulls out a small object. The wooden bluebird. It is worn smooth now from being held. She places it on the railing of the porch. Jonas reaches up and covers her hand with his. His palm is rough, warm, and alive. "The roof is holding," he says quietly. "Yes," Sarah replies, squeezing his hand. "The roof holds, and the house is warm." From inside the house, the soft cry of a baby is heard. Sarah smiles, a radiant, full smile. She stands up to go inside to their son. Jonas watches her go, then looks out at the fields. He picks up the bluebird, turns it over in his hand once, sets it back down, and whispers a prayer of thanks into the cooling evening air. The screen fades to black as the first fireflies begin to blink in the tall grass.